Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello, and welcome back for another episode of For Your Consideration, a podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenham.
Thanks for joining us. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about the 1985 dystopian science fiction film, Brazil.
Also known as Monty Python's 1984.
So this week, before we get to actually talking about the film, we have one item to cover in our Below the Line segment, which is our brand new WordPress page. Basically, it's just a blog. We're posting some commentary, essays, columns, reviews of movies that aren't on the top 100 lists or the critics lists, just basically giving us the ability to talk about anything we're watching, anything we're sort of thinking about at the time. So if you have a chance, check that out. We do cross-post all of the posts to the Facebook page, so just watch for those. And with that, we move into the commentary section of the show. So Brazil was directed by Terry Gilliam, produced by Arnon Milchan. It was written by Terry Gilliam, Tom Stoppard, and Charles McEwen. It starred Jonathan Pryce, Robert De Niro, Catherine Hellman, Ian Holm, Bob Hoskins, Michael Palin, Ian Richardson, Peter Vaughan, and Kim Greist. Music was by Michael Kamen. Cinematography by Roger Pratt. It was edited by Julian Doyle. It currently ranks number 54 on BFI's Top 100 Greatest British Films of All Time. And it was released on 20th of February 1985 in France, 22nd of February 1985 in the United Kingdom, and 18th of December 1985 in the US.
Yet another Christmas movie by For Your Consideration.
Sort of a Christmas movie, though. I mean, it did get released so much earlier in Europe than it did in the US. So maybe not a Christmas movie.
To be fair, we're also not Americans, so that doesn't apply to us here either.
Now, I also just want to qualify that the version of the movie we're going to be talking about is the 142-minute version, which is the international cut. And while we already discussed the fact that we're not really predisposed to doing director's cuts, seeing as those aren't the ones that are generally put on the lists, it's usually the theatrical cuts, this version of Brazil, it's the one that the critics like, it's the one that Gilliam likes, it's the one that is actually considered the film, the proper film. There was a 94-minute US cut, the one that was released on December 18th, and that one's got like 56 minutes cut out of it.
Which is insane.
It's pretty insane. It's an unintelligible movie, and I don't think anybody in any cinematic community, whether it's professional or fan, even like recognizes that movie as anything other than an oddity. So that's the version that we're covering. And with that, we put it to Dustin. What did you think of Brazil?
The movie actually spoke to me a fair bit because I'm actually going through what poor Jill was going through. Trying to go from just getting a receipt, just why am I being charged for this? Being sent from one section to another to get a stamp, and this guy's not talking to that guy. And I was already over here, and he told me to go over here. I've been fighting with the CRA for 3 years about this, and it's the exact same story. So if any of you think that wouldn't happen, congratulations on never having to deal with bureaucracy. It is extremely maddening, which is what the film is about.
And just for anybody who doesn't know, CRA is the Canada Revenue Agency.
Over some money which somebody else made a mistake. So on top of it all, it wasn't Jill's fault and it wasn't my fault. Everyone acknowledges on her side that, oops, this was a mistake we made. Everyone acknowledges on my side that this was a mistake we made, but we need the paperwork. It's all about the paperwork. And this movie is all about the bureaucracy and how it is driving the main character just absolutely insane, and he's retreating into a fantasy life. I'm not quite going that far, just as the CRA is not sending armed guards to try and take me out or bring me to the Ministry of Information Gathering, basically. It's not quite a dystopian present, but sometimes it almost feels like it when you've been dealing with it long enough. The movie really does feel a lot like 1984, but you can also feel Terry Gilliam's influence absolutely all over the movie. It is dripping Terry Gilliam.
I really do feel like this movie is Very much like if Kafka, Wells, Orwell, and Gilliam all had like a gangbang, and this is the baby that it produced.
Sorry, I was too busy picturing that. Or I wasn't, one of the two. I forget.
I think it's an interesting blending of the worldview of those four creative talents. It's such a bleak movie, but it's also a funny movie and kind of a fun movie, and there is a weird sort of optimism to it, but that sort of gets crushed. There's a lot kind of going on, and it's sort of hard to... It's a very straightforward story, but...
I don't know where you're getting this optimism from, quite frankly. It definitely has a lot of sort of absurdist things going on, a lot of sort of wackiness, which just adds to the whole, like, this is crazy. Like, why is the world like this? That's driving the main character crazy. And you'll have everything from people who, despite all the issues, are still going by the line of gotta have the paperwork, the bureaucracy is everything. You've got the people who are, like his mother and her friend, basically killing themselves, actually literally killing themselves in the Final Fantasy sequence, trying to look more beautiful, which doesn't work, trying to fit some sort of weird ideal, and they're just so enamored with it, down to just people who, like Jill, who, even though everyone was pointing guns at her 5 seconds earlier, she's still just going to work. Like, I gotta get to work. No one's questioning anything. There's a bomb that goes off, and they're like, oh, geez, how inconvenient.
I think the optimism that I'm kind of pointing out is more along the lines of the character Harry Tuttle, played by Robert De Niro, who, despite all of the oppression and all of the terrible bureaucracy and the enslavement to technology and the soullessness of everything, here's this repair guy who comes in on a zip line, jimmies the air conditioning, and then goes out on a zip line, and he's running around like frickin' James Bond with his gun in his hand.
He's in it for the excitement, and at first it was ridiculous. I'm like, what in the hell is going on here? But no, that's awesome.
Well, it's not so much just for the excitement. I mean, he's working against the system. He's that one little thing trying to
do good in a system that prevents anything from being done, period. If your house was on fire, I'd still have to fill out a Form 23X-J in order to do anything about it, sort of deal.
And he has that line where, because he doesn't take payment from Jonathan Pryce's character, Sam Lowry. He doesn't take payment from Sam, and when Sam is like, why are you doing this? He says, hey, we're all in this together, right? Which is a slogan used by the bureaucracy, by the government, but it's kind of been appropriated.
Happiness. We're all in this together.
Exactly. So, and to a certain degree, I think I see a little bit of optimism in Sam's character. Yes, he is retreating into a fantasy world, but the fact that despite this oppressive, totalitarian, Orwellian, Kafkaesque government city structure that he exists in,
he never gives up.
He's still able to look beyond. He's still able to dream and to imagine things. And I think it's pretty typical of Gilliam films or even just stories of this ilk to have that character get squashed in the end. So ultimately, I guess that optimism doesn't really accomplish anything, but I think it does add some fun to the film. And it doesn't make it super oppressive to watch. Like, there are some movies where you sit down and they're trying to get their point across, and they're just so bleak that by the end of it you just want to stick your head in like a tub of water and never take it out.
I've certainly heard that about 1984, that it's an important film, but it's hard to watch. This one's not hard to watch because it does have the jovialness to it, even though it ends with him going completely insane. You were saying that people called it the lobotomy scene, but that doesn't make sense to me.
Actually, calling it the lobotomy scene is probably accurate because Jack Lynch's character, played by Michael Palin, he does go in with an implement to torture him, but he doesn't actually lobotomize him.
Because at that point, Lowry basically goes insane and starts living fully in his fantasy life. And at the end of the day, that sounds like a win to me. He wasn't going to change the system overnight, that's for sure. But at least he's happy now, sitting there singing Brazil.
There is a degree of... I don't think the ending of this movie has ever been viewed as a happy ending, unless you watch the terrible 94-minute version, the Love Conquers All version, where they drive off into the sunset and live happily ever after.
Which would make absolutely no sense. especially after they said that she died.
I think it was edited in such a way. It's been so long since I've seen that 94-minute version.
No, they could easily have edited out so that...
Just don't say she's dead.
Just don't say that she died the second time and that there was a bureaucracy problem with it, because...
When you say that, that reminds me, I read somewhere that Helpman scene was one of the ones that Gilliam restored when he was given an opportunity in the Santa suit. So that scene does not exist in the 94-minute version, for sure.
So much would have been cut out in 54 minutes. That's insane.
But just to get back on point, even though nobody would agree that this movie ends on a happy note, in a way, Sam's character does escape. He does escape his life of dreariness and toiling and just the pointlessness of it all. He may have gone completely insane. He may be completely regressed into his subconscious mind, and someone's going to have to change his nappies every day. But in a way, I mean, as long as that's his perception, it's kind of still a win. It's not a great win, but it's still a win.
It's not, well, I'm going to sit around drinking victory whiskey and wait for them to kill me and be happy about it.
Another thing I loved about this movie is it's so chaotic. There's so much going on, and everything from like that opening scene with that one camera movement and all of the people being choreographed through that hallway in the ministry where he works, and they're playing the dun 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 dun, dun, and I thought it was just an amazing piece of cinema, just the way everybody moves, and I was waiting to see like a camera shake or something from somebody getting bumped or having their like ankle tagged or something. But everything from like that kind of a detailed scene to just the world building, the set design, all the posters that are everywhere. There's so many little details. There's so much design crammed into this movie, which, I mean, they didn't have like an outrageous budget, and I think Gilliam just milked every last penny out of the budget that he had to make this thing so deep and immersive. And it's definitely, I mean, this is a movie you have to watch 2, 3, 4 times before you really start to like absorb everything that's there.
Which means mine must be a terrible review because I've only seen it once.
What did you think of the set design and stuff on a first viewing, since you only saw it once?
One of the things that really got me was just the way the technology sort of all worked together. It was very brute force technology. Everything was way too big, way bigger than necessary. It's almost sort of a Victorian era futuristic thing.
Kind of steampunk?
Almost steampunk, except with far less gears, and there was a lot of steam, but that might have been just the repairs and all that.
But on the flip side, you've got the computers where the screens are the size of like a cigarette tin, but then they have those lenses
to let you magnify it.
A lot of people refer to this movie as a futuristic movie, and I've read a few commentaries from people saying there's nothing futuristic in this movie. Everything in this movie is hearkening back to some aspect or era of the past. I mean, you look at the clothes, there's a very noir element to this movie, and they are in 30s and 40s clothing, and the way that they light some of the scenes, the way that they portray, I mean, you watch Sam like walking to his apartment, that thing is right out of like a Dashiell Hammett novel. That's a Sam Spade scene if there ever was one.
The way they're treating all the money and the expense and all that. Because you got to capture this one guy who's a business guy who made some minor little error. And so they send in basically all of SWAT. They're swinging through the windows, breaking down the door, and then they give you the bill for it.
I think that's just a sign of the ultimate efficiency of a bureaucracy, to make it so that they're spending as little as they can on things that they don't need to be spending on. So they're charging you for your own arrest.
They're charging you for your own psychological torture. The guy at the very end, right before he's about to get tortured, he's like, man, just confess right away, otherwise like your insurance won't cover it.
Confess to like at least 7 or 8 of these crimes, because if you confess to all of them, you're going to go bankrupt. You're going to be like, your credit rating will be trashed.
Like, this is just a normal thing that happens. They come by and they torch you a little bit, charge you for it. I could honestly see a lot of that stuff sort of happening.
One thing that you don't get charged for in the present day is enjoying our show. And the best way to support FYC, if you're one of those people, is to go to iTunes, rate and review the show. It only takes a second. It's easy to do. It really helps us out, helps the show grow, and if you do, we'll give you a shout out on the show. So leave some feedback if you can, and we appreciate your support.
And getting back to the madness, every single person in this show does not make sense to Sam, essentially. The scene at the restaurant with his mother is the most British thing I've seen in a long time. They're sitting there, they order their food, all the food looks exactly the same. It's like they just scooped out mashed potatoes that have been colored.
I like how they have the picture.
Oh yeah, they have
so
the picture
you know what it
of
is.
the food. And they insist that you order by the number. It's like, I'll have the steak. You have to tell me the number, sir. Just get me the thing. It's right there. You have to say the number. They're so concerned about the bureaucracy, but the most British thing about it is how everyone just is so dry about everything that's going on. They don't react to the explosion going on. It's like, I'm so sorry. This doesn't normally happen here. And like,
I love the perception of the terrorists. There's the guy, the expert, talking on the news show, and he's saying, oh, there's just these terrorists out there. They're just, those people who, they just can't accept somebody else winning. They're just bad sports.
They're bad. You know what this is? This is bad sportsmanship.
Yeah. I thought that was a great line.
It's very, very British, I gotta say. But later on, when the second bomb goes off, like the first one, they don't show like much carnage. Just the wall explodes and people are hustling and bustling about and like, I'm sorry about this, so inconvenient. Oh, when will they just stop? But at the second bomb, he's walking through looking for Jill, and people are like coated in blood, sort of reaching out like, I don't know what's going on and I'm dying here. So it's much more dark all of a sudden in that moment, where he's taken completely out of his fantasy, and you can see sort of his world or his fantasy life sort of fading away in little glimpses as to what the world's probably closer to.
I think it's also probably kind of symbolic of his change in character, because in that first scene with the bombing in the restaurant, he's having dinner with his mom and a family friend and the daughter that they're trying to set him up with, and he's really self-involved. He really just wants everyone to leave him alone, and the explosion happens kind of in another section of the restaurant, and he's just really disengaged with that whole kind of world. But then once he meets Jill, and he essentially kind of sides with the whole, I guess, terrorist end, the anti-establishment side of the story. Yeah, when the explosion happens, he goes diving right into it, and he's looking for Jill. He thinks that the box that she had was a bomb, and you get to see the carnage, and I think that does represent kind of his own character's shift.
At the same time, he's still extremely self-involved in that, because he's pushing away all these injured people just looking for Jill. None of them matter.
That's true.
Only his desires. And even then, when he finds her, he just shouts at her like, how could you do this? How could you set up a bomb?
Now, speaking of Jonathan Pryce, Sam Lowry, I think Jonathan Pryce as a hero is a very kind of... He's just not who I would expect to be doing this role. And then when I sat down just, the other night to watch the movie again, it's not a role that I necessarily just really identify him with. I think he was great in the role. I think he really fit that kind of cog in the machine daydreamer type, and I thought that was great, but yeah, just an unlikely casting choice, which I think worked really well.
I was surprised to see Robert De Niro like in the credits, because I did not recognize him throughout the entire thing. It was just completely out of the blue to see his name suddenly appear as
I remember at the time, like, this was not the kind of movie that he normally did, and seeing that for the first time and seeing De Niro in a Gilliam movie, it was like, whoa. And he's so great, he's so light. I mean, he really is. He is sort of the bright center of that movie in a way.
Whereas he actually wanted to be Palin's character of the sort of sociopathic interrogator.
He originally wanted to be Lint?
He wanted to be Lint. He was actually really angry that he wasn't Lint, because the part was promised to Palin as a good buddy of Gilliam, like even before the movie started filming. It was all sort of preordained that it was going to be Palin.
I think there was a careful balance with Lint, because he did a really nasty job as part of information retrieval. He tortured people.
He came out and he was like soaked in blood in front of his own daughter.
But he had to have that very personable attitude. He had to be a character who looked like he left his work at work. And there's that great sequence where he's talking about the character of Arthur Buddle, who was wrongly brought in. It's the catalyst for the whole movie, where the guy gets taken from his home. It's the wrong guy because there's a spelling error because a bug went in the machine. And quite literally a bug. There was a bug. Anyways. Oh yeah, and he's talking about, oh no, I interrogated the right man. The wrong man was brought to me. and I was told it was the right man, so I tortured the right man. It wasn't my error. It was a clerical error. It was another department's error. This was not me, and he washes his hands of it. And I think that's why Gilliam wanted Palin, because I think he knew Palin could sort of walk that tightrope. But that's interesting to hear that De Niro wanted to play Lynn, because De Niro is so great as Tuttle. He's so great as Tuttle. He's so daring and running around with his gun and just cheery, and
until the very end when he disappears in the fantasy sequence, a bunch of bureaucratic paperwork just engulfs him and blows him away. To me, that was a very important and telling part of the movie, where it's like the bureaucracy is killing people's hope. It's killing the heroes.
It's killing everything.
It's killing all that is good. The weird thing is that happens within the fantasy sequence as well, because it's sort of at that point walking between, does he know that he's crazy? Does he know that his hope's being taken away?
But it's in those fantasy sequences where he's fighting the samurai, and the samurai represents the bureaucracy, the government, all the things that's holding him and everyone else down. So I think that battle that he's having in his fantasy, where all the characters come back, the danger is there, he has to overcome it. I think that's the interrogation without actually seeing the interrogation. That's him resisting inside his head. And then when he drives off into the sunset and lives happily ever after with Jill, that's him basically snapping and regressing.
And thus saving himself.
And escaping.
As far as acting is concerned, I think Michael Palin actually did the best job in this movie as his character, with the two different sides going on there. And I remember you saying that you weren't quite a fan of Jill outside of the fantasy sequences, but I disagree. I actually liked her sort of trying to just get on with her day attitude, and especially the way that she wasn't putting up with Sam Lowry and his nonsense. Even after she was sort of saved from gunpoint by him, it's like, who the hell are you? Stop professing your love to me and go away. Be gone. Tries to kick him out so many times.
Literally.
Very literally. She gets both feet in there, which is impressive when you're driving.
He kind of rolls around that truck for like a good 2 or 3 minutes.
Which is also impressive, quite frankly. But I enjoyed her role in this, even though you apparently did not, and neither did Terry Gilliam, apparently.
Well, she wasn't my favorite. Like, I think everybody was good in this movie. I think a few people were absolutely great in this movie, and I would put Kim Greist in the good category. I also loved Ian Holm as Kurtzman, his boss. He was such a... I mean, I like Ian Holm as an actor just in general, but he brought something to that role. He was so nervous and twitchy and effete and just kind of unable to properly... I could never decide if he was unable to properly perform his job kind of up to spec, or if he was getting other people, particularly Sam, to sort of do little bits of his job so that he could deny accountability.
All he was concerned about was whether or not this was my fault.
So you lie 100% on the accountability side.
At the end of the day, that's actually a bureaucratic issue in real life. I forget the exact name. I think it's the Peter Principle, where people get promotions until they hit a point where they can no longer do their job, and then they're stuck there. And thus... No, this is an actual thing. And thus, all management eventually becomes ineffective because you're promoted to the point of incompetency. It's a strange thing, but this is exactly how it works out for this guy. And he's hoping that good old Sam can save his ass over and over and over again.
Now, is it sad or is it interesting that this film, 30 years on, is still relevant in an almost painful way?
I'd say it's interesting. It's not as sad as it could be. It could be more accurate, which would be scarier.
Okay, I have one last point that I just want to make before we move into the judgment segment of the show. There's no way that Gilliam could have known it at the time, but I really like how this film is kind of a metaphor for the making for the film. The themes in it of the bureaucracy and the guy who keeps retreating into fantasy and kind of fighting the system, because it's pretty well known about all of the hoops that Gilliam had to jump through, the war that basically took place behind closed doors with Universal and Gilliam trying to get a cut of this movie released that he could live with. And we talked about the 94-minute cut which was just considered an abomination by kind of anybody. And Gilliam went behind Universal's back, showing the movie in the US to get the critics to say, yes, it's one of the greatest movies we've seen ever, which put pressure on Universal, which they didn't like. And I mean, this movie did kind of break Gilliam. I don't think he's ever been the same since this film. And, you know, if you put Gilliam in the role of Sam Lowry, you know, Lowry is a fantasist. Lowry is the guy who's stuck in this machine, and he's the one who's dreaming. He's the one who, you know, thinks he can fly and is up in the clouds, and everyone's just trying to beat him and stop him and break him down. And by the end of it, I mean, after this movie, with the exception of maybe The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, he worked on much smaller things. They were no less ambitious in theme or idea, but he had smaller budgets. People didn't trust him. Anyways, I thought that was just kind of an interesting little tidbit. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
None whatsoever.
Okay, so that, I guess, closes out the commentary section of the show, which moves us into the judgment segment of the show. So, Dustin, once again, we'll put it to you. Is Brazil one of the greatest films of all time?
I was struggling once again with this one as to whether or not it would make it in as a classic. On one hand, like, it does have a lot of personal relevance to me, and it took a little bit of time for me to just sitting there thinking about the movie after seeing it, for it to sort of sink in and for me to realize what it was that I just saw. And there was a lot more to it than I certainly noticed just during the actual watching of the film. And it is still very relevant today, as we were saying earlier. As I said, the exact same thing is sort of happening to me, and I would say that it is something that will be relevant in the future, of a bureaucracy and all these forms and whatnot killing creativity and stifling people in their lives. And it's presented in such a way that it's not going to alienate the viewer, and it's going to be entertaining at the same time. I think it'll be something that'll stand the test of time, and I would say that it is a classic.
I'd have to agree with you, just based on the fact that there's so much going on in this movie. It works on so many levels. It's still relevant. It's still enjoyable. The performances are solid. It's just all there. And I think that this definitely deserves to be put on whatever list is out there.
Central Services. We do the work, you do the pleasure.
So there you have it, another episode of For Your Consideration in the bag. That's 2 yes votes for Brazil, so it gets to stay in its position
On its lofty perch.
It is a masterpiece, not a museum piece. If you want to keep up to date with goings-on with the For Your Consideration community, check out our Facebook page. We're on Twitter at FYC Show. We're on all the other social media. And if you want to send us an email, we're at fycshowmail@gmail.com. If you want to discuss this episode or the film Brazil, head over to our Facebook page, leave some comments, or you can hashtag FYC Brazil on Twitter. And that's a wrap. I'm Mike.
And I'm Dustin.
We'll see you next time.
Ta-ta.
You got nothing. Nothing. That's De Niro. That's Al Capone.
I felt that was a reference, but once
In the
again, did not
Untouchables.
over the head. I could feel the breeze off of that one.